The silence was not an absence of sound, it was a frequency. It was a high-pitch, electronic whine that lived inside the skull of Staff Sergeant Henry Hank Mitchell, a permanent resident carved out by 3 years of listening to the ionosphere scream. Hank was a signal intelligence intercept operator for the U.S. Army's 86th Signal Battalion, stationed on the mud-slicked corpse-ridden island of Okinawa. It was the night of August 14, 1945. The air outside the canvas walls of the listening post was a physical weight, a suffocating blanket of tropical humidity, diesel fumes, and the sweet, cloying scent of decay that the bulldozers had never quite managed to scrape off the island. Hank's normal was a world reduced to the amber glow of vacuum tubes and the rhythmic, staccato clatter of the teletype machine. His war wasn't fought with a rifle. It was fought with a pair of bakelite headphones and a relentless, grinding paranoia. He lived in a state of suspended animation, a purgatory of waiting. The rumors had been swirling for days. The golden word, surrender. The atomic bombs had fallen on Hiroshima and Nagasaki like hammers from an angry god, and the Soviets had smashed into Manchuria. The logic of the war said it was over. The machinery of survival, however, hadn't gotten the memo. He sat hunched over his Hallicrafter's S-36 receiver, tuning the dial with fingertips that were stained yellow from nicotine and cracked from the DAMP. The radio spectrum was a chaotic ocean of noise. American logistical chatter, the desperate, encrypted bursts of Japanese units cut off in the hills, and the terrifying, endless hiss of the Pacific storms. Hank's job was to sift through the garbage and find the jewels, the operational orders, the movement codes, the pulse of the enemy's dying heart. "You hearing that ghost signal on 14.2 again, Hank?" asked Corporal Stick Sweeney, a lanky kid from Arkansas who was slumped over the adjacent receiver, spinning a Zippo lighter nervously. "Just static sticks. Just the atmosphere boiling," Hank muttered, not looking up. He took a drag from a cigarette that was more ash than tobacco. "Keep scanning the high bands. Tokyo screams. I want to hear the throat clear." The tent was sweltering. Condensation dripped from the ceiling cables, landing with maddening irregularity on the metal casings of the decoders. Outside, the blackout was absolute. A siren echoed distantly from the airfield, and an air raid alert. Just the mournful mechanical howl of a crash truck testing its gear. It was a sound that fit the mood, efficient, lonely, and anticipating disaster. Hank checked his watch, 23 o'clock. Hours. The world was holding its breath. The diplomatic cables said the Japanese Foreign Ministry was suing for peace. The Potsdam Declaration had been accepted, theoretically. But Hank knew the difference between diplomats in suits and soldiers. In bunkers, he had listened to the fanaticism on the radio for too long. He knew about the Gyuka side, the shattering jewel, the glorious death. The diplomats might be surrendering, but the Imperial Army hadn't stopped digging spider holes. Then came the disturbance. It wasn't a loud noise, it was a shift in the rhythm. The teletype machine in the corner, usually chattering away with routine logistical intercepts, food shortages. Unit consolidation suddenly engaged its carriage return with a violent clack-clack-clack that signaled a priority override. Hank spun his chair around. The paper tape began to punch out a message. It wasn't encrypted in the standard JN25 naval code or the lower-level Army field codes. It was high-level, ultra-priority, coming directly from the intercept towers that monitored the mainland traffic. Hank ripped the tape off as it finished. He walked over to the Type-X decoding machine, his movements automatic. He keyed in the day's settings, his heart doing a slow, heavy thud against his ribs. If this was the surrender, the official military stand down it would be in plain text or a specific diplomatic cipher. It WASN single quotes. The machine clattered, spitting out the deciphered text in a stark, most terrifying ribbon of uppercase letters. Source: Imperial General Headquarters, Tokyo War Ministry Destination. Commander, Imperial Guards Division Time, 14 August 23:45 JST Priority. Flash Crimson text. Protect the Kakutai. The proclamation is a betrayal. Seize the palace. Secure the recording. Disregard all civilian broadcasts at noon tomorrow. Execute traitors. The war continues. Hank stared at the paper. The sweat on his back turned to ice. Sticks. Hank whispered, his voice trembling. Get the lieutenant. Now. What is it? Is it over? Sticks asked, halfway out of his chair. No, Hank said, the word feeling like a stone in his throat. It's starting over. This was the precise, factual disturbance-coded message that shouldn't exist in a world that was celebrating peace. The recording referred to the emperor's surrender speech, scheduled to be broadcast to the Japanese nation at noon the next day. The message wasn't a surrender. It was a coup d'état. Hardline military officers were moving to seize the emperor, destroy the recording, and force the war to continue until the final annihilation of the Japanese race. Lieutenant Howell, the shift officer, burst into the tent a moment later, looking disheveled and annoyed. He was a man who had already mentally packed his bags for home. This better be good, Mitchell. I was halfway through a bottle of Victory Scotch. Hank handed him the intercept. It's not victory, sir. It's a counterorder. Look at the timestamp. Look at the origin. This is the War Ministry telling the guards to storm the palace. They're calling the surrender a betrayal. Howell read it, his face paling slightly. But then he shook his head, handing the paper back. It's chatter, Mitchell. Desperate noise. We have confirmation from the Swiss channels. The Emperor has agreed. Truman is drafting the announcement. This is just some die-hard colonel shouting into the void before he eats a bullet. Sir, this is a flash priority command to the Imperial Guards, Hank argued, the desperation rising in his chest. If they seize the palace, the Emperor doesn't speak. If the Emperor doesn't speak, the army doesn't stand down. If the army doesn't stand down, the B-29s keep flying. We invade in November. Sir, this is a coup. It is not our problem, Howell snapped, the fatigue of the war finally snapping his patience. The machinery is already stopping. The heavy bombers have been ordered to stand down after tonight's raid. The fleet is holding fire. We are not going to panic command with a rogue intercept when the ink is drying on the treaty. Log it, file it, and go back to your post. The order was rescinded to Lator. Rather, the warning was dismissed too early. Howell turned and left the tent, retreating back to his scotch and his belief in a rational ending. Hank stood alone. In the hum of the machinery, he looked at the paper strip in his hand. The war continues. He sat back down at his receiver. He felt a profound, nauseating dissonance. Outside, he could hear the faint sound of shouting from the GI encampment down the ridge cheering. Someone had fired a flare gun in celebration. They thought it was over. They thought the dawn brought peace. Hank put his headphones back on. He tuned the dial frantically, searching for confirmation. He found it on a sideband frequency used by the Japanese localized defense networks on the mainland. It wasn't silence. It was a hive of activity. Unit 221. Mobilize, ... Blockade, the Sakashita Gate. Cut the phone lines to the Prime Minister's residence. The coup was happening right now. While the world celebrated, a group of officers with swords and pistols were running through the burning streets of Tokyo, trying to find a 6-inch lacquer record that contained the voice of a god. If they found it and smashed it, the war would reset. The atomic bombs would have been for nothing. The invasion of Kyushu Operation Olympic would go ahead, and Hank would be in the first wave of signalmen on the beach. He felt a sudden, overwhelming exhaustion. The fragile version of normal, the belief that there was a finish line, shattered. The war wasn't a linear event. It was a chaotic, living organism that refused to die. He looked at the teletype again. A new message was coming in. This one. From the U.S. Pacific Command to all units. Cease offensive operations, effective immediately. Upon confirmation of 12 o'clock broadcast, it was a conditional peace. It hinged entirely on a broadcast that the Japanese army was currently trying to stop. Hank reached for his logbook. His hands shook as he wrote the entry. The 14th of August 2355 intercept indicates hostile action against Imperial Palace. Coup attempt. In progress. Command notified. Command dismissed. He felt like a man standing on a railroad track, watching a train coming while everyone else was facing the other way. Looking at a sunset, suddenly the air raid siren from the airfield sounded. Again this time, it wasn't a test. It was the scramble alarm. Tank ran to the tent flap and threw it open. He looked toward the airstrip. The engines of the P-61 Black Widow night fighters were roaring to life. Sticks. He yelled. Why are they scrambling? Press tight. Radar. We got bogeys. Low and fast, coming from the north. Suicide run. They're trying to hit the fleet while we're celebrating. It was the kamikaze of the twilight. The last desperate gasp. The coup wasn't just in Tokyo. It was a coordinated spasm of violence. The diehards were launching everything they had left, hoping to provoke a retaliation that would shatter the ceasefire before it began. Hank watched the tracers arc up into the night sky from the anti-aircraft. Batteries on the ridge. The darkness erupted into a chaotic light show of gold and red. The celebration down the ridge turned into panicked shouting.